The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., January 13, 2025. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Roger Marshall, a senator from the state of Kansas, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Chuck Grassley, President pro tempore.
The chair lays before the Senate a communication of the Secretary of the Senate regarding a message from the President received during the adjournment of the Senate.
Dear Mr. President, on Friday, January 10th, 2025, the President of the United States sent by messenger the attached sealed envelope addressed to the President of the Senate dated January 10th, 2025, said to contain the economic report of the President together with the annual report of the Council of Economic Advisors. The Senate not being in session on the day which the President delivered this message, I accepted the message at 3:55 p.m., and I now present to you the President's message with the accompanying papers for disposition by the Senate. Respectfully, Jackie Barber, Secretary of the Senate.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S5, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to counter number 1, S5, a bill to require the Secretary of Homeland Security to take into custody aliens who have been charged in the United States with theft and for the purposes.
The Democratic leader.
Mr. President, this week, the American people will see for the first time what kind of Trump administration they're going to get in the coming years. One that will fight for working people, or one that will fight for the swamp. Over the next 4 days, over a dozen of the President-elect's nominees will testify in committee and make their case to the country. These hearings, in a very real way, are the opening salvo for holding the Trump administration accountable to the public. So today I want to talk a little bit about how Senate Democrats will approach these hearings to uphold our promise to stand up for America's working and middle class. These hearings will be the very first real opportunity to get the Trump administration on who they will fight for, working people or the special interests. Our approach will be this. We will use these hearings to show the contrast between Donald Trump's agenda of helping the special interests, especially the very wealthy, and the Democrats' agenda to fight for working Americans. Nominees should expect tough, candid, but fair questioning. They should come prepared to be honest about everything: their backgrounds, their experiences, and their commitment to increasing opportunity for all Americans, not just those at the top. They will also be asked tough questions about where they stand on the President-elect's stated policies on things that will hurt the middle class, such as tariffs, tax cuts for the wealthy, and undermining policies that lower drug prices. Now, if the President-elect's nominees demonstrate they are qualified and committed to lowering costs, increasing wages, and strengthening our security, Democrats will take that very seriously. But if the President-elect's nominees are going to push policies that make inflation worse and put more money in the pocket of special interests, or duck those important questions, they will be put on the record about their views for all the American people to see. That is why Democrats have insisted on regular order for the President-elect's nominees. A thorough nominations process ensures the American people know precisely who these nominees are and who they'll fight for. Unfortunately, a troubling pattern emerged last week from some Republican chairs who seemed eager to rush the nomination process without fully getting all the necessary documentation. Getting documents is not trivial busywork. These are financial disclosures, ethics agreements, and FBI background investigations. If these nominees have something to hide, these documents could show it. So it's important we don't rush to hearings without examining the record first. The more Senate Republicans try to rush the process without the proper documentation, the more Americans will ask themselves, what are Republicans and their nominees trying to hide? How can Americans trust, for example, that Donald Trump's cabinet will be free from conflicts of interest if Republicans hold hearings before anyone's getting a chance to review financial disclosures? How can Americans trust that these nominees will serve the public interest if we don't first examine all their ethics agreements? How can Americans trust that Senate Republicans will do what's best for the American people if they're more focused on keeping Donald Trump happy than examining every nominee carefully? If these nominees will push policies that make Americans' lives worse, Americans deserve to know it, and we can determine that with a complete, thorough, and exhaustive nomination process. On Mr. Hegseth, tomorrow's hearing with Pete Hegseth is a good example of why a thorough and tough nominations process is so important. Mr. Hegseth is Donald Trump's pick to be Secretary of Defense, arguably the most important position in the entire cabinet. If confirmed, Mr. Hegseth will oversee a workforce of over 3 million people and handle issues of life and death on a regular basis. His job will be to keep our troops safe and keep our country safe. If there's any cabinet position that ought to have a steady and drama-free individual, it is certainly Secretary of Defense. Unfortunately, Mr. Hegseth's background is deeply troubling, to put it generously. We all have read reports about his radical views, his alleged excessive drinking, the allegations about sexual assault, and his failures in the financial stewardship of multiple organizations. These are such serious allegations for such an important job. So why would the Armed Services Committee wish to rush through these hearings, particularly when the documents are not available to all the members of the committee, including the FBI background check? Mr. Hegseth will have an opportunity to answer questions about these allegations and about his record, as well as his views. He can expect his hearing to be tough but respectful, candid but fair. The stakes during tomorrow's hearings will be very high, not just for the nominee, but for the entire country. It's not hard to imagine an emergency situation where the Secretary of Defense has to make quick and steady decisions about our military. Is someone with Pete Hegseth's alleged history really the kind of person we want at the helm in a very, very important situation, dangerous situation like that? Is that really in the best interests of American safety? That's something senators should ask themselves during tomorrow's hearing. And of course, they should ask Mr. Hegseth questions about it. When it comes to a job like Secretary of Defense, there can be zero question, zero, that the nominee's up for the job. Unfortunately, Mr. Hegseth's record leaves too many unanswered questions. Let's hope we get real answers and real documentation before anyone votes for Mr. Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. On Laken Riley, today the Senate will vote on a motion to proceed on the Laken Riley Act. The Senate invoked cloture on this bill last week with a strong bipartisan vote. As I said last week, Democrats want to have a robust debate where we can offer amendments and improve this bill. This issue is very important. Americans deserve for us to debate the issue seriously, including by considering amendments from the Democratic side. We're going to ask our Republican colleagues to allow for debate and votes on amendments. I hope my Republican colleagues will allow for it. And finally, on the January 6 pardons, not finally, next to finally, Donald Trump has promised to spend the first hour of his presidency pardoning the violent mob which stormed the Capitol and attacked our police officers on January 6th. Instead of focusing on helping working families or lowering health care costs or making life better for the American people, Donald Trump's very first priority seems to be pardoning the January 6 rioters. And yesterday on Fox News Sunday, the Vice President-elect, J.D. Vance, feeling the heat that these pardons are not very popular with the American people, said that while those who committed violence should not be pardoned, he implied that those who did not commit violence could deserve to be pardoned. The people who invaded the Capitol on January 6th, whether they committed violence or not, should not be pardoned. They unlawfully broke into the Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. What they did is a serious crime. There's no gray area here. There would be nothing more insulting to our democracy and to the memory of those who died in connection of that day than letting rioters walk free. We would be saying, in effect, that you can storm the Capitol, engage in violence against police officers, or be part of a crowd that engaged in such violence, and try to overturn a free and fair election, and then walk away with no consequences. Rioters who broke into the Capitol on January 6 to try and stop the peaceful transfer of power and subvert our democracy do not deserve a presidential pardon. Whether they committed violence or not, no one who participated in one of the darkest, most shameful days in American history should be pardoned. Finally, on a Holocaust survivor on Long Island who I met with this morning. One of my favorite things about serving as the senior senator from New York is that I get a chance to travel around the state and meet so many exceptional New Yorkers. This morning on Long Island, I had a chance to meet an especially exceptional New Yorker, a living legend, a 100-year-old woman named Pina Frazinetti Wax, a Holocaust survivor and proud Long Island resident. She was sheltered by Catholic nuns in a convent for 2 years to keep the Germans from sending her to concentration camp. And, Mr. President, these days, there are so many Holocaust deniers, people who say it never existed or was, quote, exaggerated. And then there are so many more young people who know nothing about the history of the Holocaust, that those who survived it are very, very important to our history, to helping us understand what happened, to be a living witness to this awful, awful, awful genocide that occurred against the Jewish people. Miss Wax is such a survivor. She combined her 100th birthday with constantly reminding people of the horrors of Nazi Germany and what was done to the Jewish people. So to this morning, it was my honor to present her with a flag flown over the Capitol, expressing the Senate's recognition of her extraordinary life. And enduring so much tragedy during one of the darkest chapters of human history, Pina has dedicated her life to teaching, loving, learning, and preserving the memory of the Holocaust. And even at 100 years old, she's showing no signs of slowing down. She's whip smart, as energetic as ever, and still going very, very strong. People like her give all of us hope that in the end, compassion and courage will always endure over hatred and fear. Always. Long Island's lucky to have her. New York is proud to call her one of our own, and the world is much better off because of her. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, by now I think a lot of Americans know the story of Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student at Augusta University in Georgia with her whole life ahead of her. Laken was murdered last February while out on a run on the Athens campus of the University of Georgia. Her killer was arrested the next day. and it quickly became clear that he should never have had the opportunity to get near Laken Riley because he should never have been in the country in the first place. Laken's killer had entered the country illegally, been released into the interior, and had subsequently been arrested in New York City and later issued a citation for shoplifting in Georgia a few short months before Laken's murder. After his New York City arrest, he was released before Immigration and Customs Enforcement could issue a detainer, a request that police hold an individual so that he can be taken into immigration custody. And so this individual here in the United States illegally and subsequently involved in 2 crimes was free on the University of Georgia campus last February when Laken Riley went running. Mr. President, it's already a problem that we are releasing huge numbers of individuals here illegally into the interior of the country. It is unthinkable that an individual like Laken's killer would be released back into society. Laken's killer should have been detained long before he had a chance to get near her last February. Mr. President, shortly after Laken was killed, Senator Katie Britt, together with Senator Budd, introduced legislation that would require Immigration and Customs Enforcement to detain individuals charged with theft, burglary, or shoplifting. It's a common-sense measure that should be an unquestioned yes for every senator. And I'm very pleased that the Senate is finally taking up this bill after Democrats blocked a vote on it last year. The fact that 33 Democrat senators voted in favor of moving to the bill on Thursday was an encouraging sign that at least some Democrats might be serious about wanting to work with Republicans to address border and immigration security. And I hope that proves to be true. It would be incredibly disappointing if Democrats moved to the bill simply to attempt to load it down with poison pills or unrelated measures. This is not, I emphasize not, a comprehensive immigration bill. It is an attempt to right one wrong: the fact that individuals already here illegally who have been charged with various property crimes are not required to be detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It is an attempt to ensure that no other family will have to suffer the pain suffered by Laken Riley's. And so I hope, Mr. President, that Democrats will work with us in a serious fashion to actually pass this legislation. Mr. President, after 4 years of chaos at our southern border under President Biden, there's a lot of work to be done on both the immigration and border security fronts. The kind of unchecked illegal immigration that we've experienced at our southern border under President Biden serves as an invitation to terrorists, criminals, and other dangerous individuals to enter our country. Currently, Senate Republicans are working on a major package that will include substantial funding for a variety of border and immigration security needs, including increasing the number of Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers and Border Patrol agents, increasing detention space, and providing the barriers and technology that we need to secure the border. I look forward to taking up that package. In the meantime, however, we have a bill before us today that will address one problem in current immigration law and perhaps prevent other families from suffering the pain that Laken Riley's has suffered. Mr. President, let's get it done. Mr. President, before I yield the floor, let me say I understand that there is a bill at the desk that is due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for a second time.
H.R. 23, an act to impose sanctions with respect to the International Criminal Court and so forth.
Mr. President, in order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I would object to further proceeding.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, later today, the Senate will vote on the motion to proceed to legislation known as the Laken Riley Act. The loss of a child is something no parent should have to endure. My thoughts and prayers are with the family of Laken Riley, by every measure an outstanding young woman. We should do everything possible to make sure this type of tragedy never occurs again. But I do have concerns about some of the language in this legislation. Let me give you an example. This bill would mandate immigration detention for an undocumented immigrant if they are arrested for shoplifting, even if they're never charged or convicted for that offense. Most people, having paid a little attention to law enforcement review, television, movies, know the process. You steal a candy bar, hand on the shoulder, the clerk says, wait a minute, what are you doing here? Next thing you know, a policeman's called in, and he arrests you for shoplifting. They then take you in and charge you with that crime. You make a plea, guilty or not guilty, and ultimately it's resolved by a trial of some nature. That's the ordinary process. The question is whether or not someone should be deported at the very first time that the hand reaches your shoulder with your candy bar in hand, but no charge of any crime. That is what this bill does. That's going a little bit too far as I'm personally concerned. This bill would mandate immigrant detention for an undocumented immigrant if they're arrested for shoplifting, not convicted, even if they're never charged or convicted. Current law requires mandatory detention of individuals with serious criminal convictions by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE. This has been on the books for a long time. It's the right thing to do. I don't want dangerous people coming into this country, and I don't want anyone who's dangerous and is undocumented to stay in this country, period. Existing law gives ICE discretion to retain undocumented immigrants on a case-by-case basis. ICE assesses each case individually, so the agency's limited resources are used effectively to protect national security and public safety. This bill, as currently written, would eliminate ICE's discretion to prioritize detention and deportation of dangerous individuals. Instead, it requires ICE to treat a child arrested for shoplifting candy the same as an adult convicted of child abuse. Why? In practice, this would overwhelm ICE detention facilities and make America less safe. Let me tell you some of the numbers of this, what appears to be a simple bill. ICE told my office that this legislation would require them to detain more than 65,000 immigrants. But Congress has only provided ICE with funding to detain 42,000, and the agency is already holding nearly that many. So if this legislation becomes law, ICE would be forced to release tens of thousands of other immigrants who were detained under ICE's current policies, which prioritize those who pose a threat to public safety. This bill would also grant state attorneys general the standing to sue if a state disagrees with many unrelated decisions made by federal immigration authorities. It would require federal courts to prioritize these cases to the greatest extent possible. This would rob federal judges of the ability to control their courtrooms and grind their dockets to a halt. These standing provisions would also undermine the supremacy of the federal government over immigration and border security, established by our Constitution. They could also dramatically reduce legal immigration into our country because the way it's drafted, the Department of State under any administration could be blocked from issuing visas to nationals from a certain country, like India or China. Perhaps some of my colleagues think they're pretty good policy goals, but they have nothing to do with the tragic murder of this young woman. If we are going to consider this bill, we must have a chance to offer amendments to fix a few of these problems and ensure the bill would accomplish its goal. Now, Mr. President, this week the Senate Judiciary Committee will hold a confirmation hearing for Pam Bondi, President-elect Trump's choice for Attorney General. I appreciated meeting with Ms. Bondi last week to discuss issues of great importance to the American people. She's impressive. She's clearly a professional and a trusted attorney and has an amazing background. I appreciated meeting with her. The significance of the Attorney General cannot be overstated. The Department of Justice is responsible for safeguarding civil rights and liberties, promoting public safety, ensuring economic opportunity and fairness. An independent Attorney General is essential. The Justice Department leader must be loyal to the Constitution above all else, including the President. But during his first term, then President Trump used Department of Justice as his personal attorneys. He tried to thwart the Mueller investigation, protect political allies, and even overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump has pledged that during his second term, He will weaponize the Justice Department to seek revenge on his political enemies. The President-elect has made it clear that he values one thing above all else in the Attorney General: loyalty. I have no reason to believe President-elect Trump has changed his litmus test for Attorney General or his views on how the Justice Department should operate. In fact, I fear he found someone who can pass this loyalty test. We'll see at the hearing. The obvious concern with Ms. Bondi is whether she will follow the bipartisan tradition of the post-Watergate era and oversee an independent Department of Justice that upholds the rule of law. Ms. Bondi is one of 4 personal lawyers to President-elect Trump who he's already selected for Department of Justice positions. She was a leader in an effort to overturn the 2020 election. She has echoed the president's calls for prosecuting his political opponents, and she has a troubling history of unflinching loyalty to the president-elect. In addition, she has a record of hostility to fundamental civil rights, including reproductive rights, voting rights, and LGBTQ rights. Every president has the right to nominate individuals to serve in key cabinet positions. However, the Senate has a constitutional duty to provide advice and consent on these nominations. This week's hearing will provide an opportunity to learn more about her nomination, and her vision. The American people deserve an Attorney General who will protect their fundamental rights, demonstrate independence and integrity, and remain faithful to the Constitution, the country, and the rule of law. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
the senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum, Paul?
We are not.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, sir.
Mr. President, I rise today to address the profound economic, social, and political importance of TikTok's creators and the serious consequences of a nationwide TikTok ban. When the Senate passed legislation last year authorizing a ban on TikTok, it was bundled with essential foreign aid measures. Critically, the Senate never held a direct vote on the TikTok ban itself. This rushed process left many of my colleagues with the impression that ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, would divest from the platform, rendering the ban unnecessary, as its proponents had suggested. Back in April, I took to this chamber floor to warn that such an approach was ill-considered. Today, with TikTok on the brink of being banned in the United States, my concerns have become a reality. Because what we're learning is that the TikTok law is indeed a TikTok ban. As the January 19th deadline approaches, TikTok creators and users across the nation are understandably alarmed. They are uncertain about the future of the platform, their accounts, and the vibrant online communities they have cultivated. Supporters of the law have often dismissed TikTok as trivial, characterizing it as a platform dominated by juvenile dance videos and seemingly inconsequential content. They were wrong then, and they are wrong now. TikTok, like all social media platforms, has flaws, but TikTok is also critical for millions of creators to earn a living, for young people to express themselves, and for Americans of all ages to foster community, share a laugh, and learn something new. Yes, sometimes these laughs come from the shared experience of attempting to learn and recreate a funny dance video, but just as often TikTok provides space for meaningful political conversations on everything from gun violence to climate change. Most recently, TikTok users have been sharing harrowing videos of the devastating wildfires that have destroyed thousands of homes in California. And these personal videos have provided a first-hand account of the tragedy, creating a virtual gathering space for shared stories, mutual support, and urgent calls for assistance to this climate change-created catastrophe. Over the past 24 hours, I've received millions of views on my TikTok videos advocating for an end to the ban. One of these videos has over 20,000 comments and counting. That's tens of thousands of users reaching out to make their voices heard. And I've been tagged in hundreds of stories over the past 24 hours as TikTok users have posted short videos explaining why TikTok is important for their lives. Meredith Lynch, a writer and comedian from my home state of Massachusetts, currently residing in Los Angeles, said, quote, "Here in Los Angeles, I know I personally, and I know so many other people have been relying on this app during the fires. It is a way in which we can spread information that the community needs. It is a way in which we are spreading resources." Ray, a user who has recently been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, explained, quote, "Because of TikTok, I was able to come on here and share my story. I was able to participate in the Creator Rewards program. And that money is going to help me pay for my cancer surgery." Mary, a disabilities rights advocate and low-income single mother living in Rhode Island, shared that she plays ukulele on TikTok for tips, which pays for her groceries. She explained, "While the district failed me, I found a community on TikTok. This is just a small sample of the thousands of stories that TikTok users are posting about the app's importance in their life. If my colleagues remain unmoved by these personal accounts, they should consider the political implications of the TikTok ban. The 170 million Americans that use TikTok each month will be furious when their favorite platform goes dark. That's 170 million Americans, 170 million reasons to think very carefully about their position on TikTok ban. Make no mistake, these communities cannot be replicated on another app. Creators and small businesses cannot rebuild their audiences overnight. And many have stated that thanks to TikTok's unique culture, it is impossible to develop a similar following on another platform. Users cannot transfer their followers and communities to a new platform. A ban would dismantle a one-of-a-kind informational and cultural ecosystem, silencing millions in the process. The stakes are very high over the next week. And that's why I will soon introduce the Extend the TikTok Deadline Act to extend the deadline by which ByteDance must sell TikTok or face a ban, and it should be extended by an additional 270 days. Now that my colleagues understand that the TikTok ban is real, we need time to have a deeper conversation about how to address the national security risks caused by ByteDance's ownership of TikTok. We need time to understand the ban's implication on TikTok's creators and users. We need time to consider alternative ideas. This legislation does not repeal the original legislation. It merely allows for more time. Let me be clear. TikTok has its problems. Like every social media platform, TikTok poses a serious risk to the privacy and mental health of our young people in our country. In fact, TikTok paid a fine for violating my law, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, just a few years ago. I'm proud of my law, and I'm proud that the Federal Trade Commission took action under my law. But they've also done